So there's a difference between our meta, the way we play, and how the Japanese players play. The biggest difference is we play the 4-stat meta. Like I said, you can raise 4 stats to close to maximum. You'll have to make some decisions. Maybe you take less life to get more points into skill. So there's a little bit of variety, but usually you get around 4 stats maxed out. The Japanese meta is 2,997 composite stat cap, which is exactly half of max stats. So if you wanted a monster with like 500 or 499 in every stat, that would be stat cap for that tournament. But that's the thing, nobody wants that. Nobody wants 499 or 500 in every stat. What they want is 999 in the stats that they can get it in. And so what ends up happening is, because it's only half of max stats, you end up maxing 3 stats and using 3 stats as dump stats that have like close to 1. As close to 1 as possible for those stats. What that ends up doing is it makes it so the meta is you either build a tank who has 999 life, 999 power, 999 skill, or you build a speed monster that has 999 power, 999 skill, and then 800 speed and 200 life. Those are like the 2 main builds. So you build the tank or you build the glass cannon that dies in 1 hit. One of those isn't inherently better than the other. It depends on the breed of monster. We're not going to get into that, but it depends on the breed of monster. But that's the meta. You know, those are the 2 main builds. But what can happen is, because the Japanese players play tournaments so often, it's like multiple tournaments a week. Maybe that'll start happening now, but because it's multiple tournaments a week and every tournament they run has the exact same stat cap, they don't run any fun gimmicks like we do occasionally, where you have to like build a special monster for the next tournament. They just build a monster once or twice. They build like 2 monsters, and then they enter those monsters into every single tournament. And because tournaments are so common there, the scene is so much bigger there. This guy does not want me to finish my fucking story. It's pretty funny though. Because tournaments are so much more common, they'll run like 2 or 3 events a week, right? And because we run 2 or 3 events a week, people are very, like, they're not precious about the outcome. If their monster loses round 1, who cares? There's a tournament tomorrow. If their monster loses round 1 there, who cares? There's a tournament tomorrow as well. And so they do best of 1 single elimination tournaments up until a certain point, and then becomes best of 3. But not only is that kind of frustrating if your monster instantly dies like in the first 4 seconds of the match and you're just out, because those are the 2 main builds, what you can do is you can make a build that hard counters one of those builds to a point where it will almost literally never lose to it, but it cannot possibly beat the other build. So the easiest example of this is you build a monster where instead of going 999 life, 999 skill, 999 power, you do 999 life, 999 power, and then like 400 skill and 600 defense. And what you've done now is built a tank that can't lose to other tank monsters. Any monster that just ran life, power, and skill will not be able to beat you. They will not be able to do enough damage. But because you have such low skill, it doesn't really matter in that matchup, right? They have no speed. 400 skill is more than enough to beat your opponent. But as soon as you run into a monster that's running max speed, you've lost. Like, you're never going to hit them. Game over for you. And the frustrating part about that is you can make a monster that's like meticulously made and you've min-maxed and you've been like, okay, this is a really good tank build. I'm happy about this. I think it's well balanced. I think it's going to do well. And you roll into fucking youngster Joey running his shitty anti-tank build, his like ultra tank build, round 1, and you lose, and then he immediately busters out next round because his build sucks in every other fight except for the one against you. You've lost. And so a lot of the time in a 2997 stat cap or low stat caps, because you have to gamble so hard, it's very, very inconsistent. And it makes things not that much fun for a lot of people. The reason people there in Japan don't really care about the inconsistency for the most part is because there's so many tournaments. You lose, okay, whatever. There's a tournament next week, not a big deal. Or there's a tournament tomorrow, not a big deal. And I'm entering the same monster in all of them, so maybe he'll do better next time. But for ours, we do things like, well, there's not a lot of conformity in the stat caps and in the rules. And maybe there will be in DX with a bigger group of people. But what we do is we do sign sheets, and there's usually a theme of some kind. There's usually like only monsters that are like dragon subtypes or something like that. So if you raised a Blue Kato for the 2997 tournaments, all of a sudden there's a tournament where you got to raise a Draco Kato. And you're like, oh, fuck, well, I guess I can't use that. I got to make a new monster. And so because you got to make a new monster every time, it would be really, really unfortunate if you lost in the first 4 seconds. Like, that's a huge waste of your time, you know? So because of that, we run best of 3 on everything, and we run higher stat caps to increase consistency a little bit. So we value different things than they do. It's thinking of monsters that are only 1 or 2 years at a tournament. So, I mean, we can do that too. But the thing is, if you just casually raise a monster at 1 year, you're going to get annihilated. There was a tournament that I won 2 years ago called Spartan Babies. And basically what it was is you had 1 year to raise a monster fresh from the shrine. You had to post pictures that was from the shrine, so like to prove it was from the shrine. And once you did that, you had exactly 1 year. And it was like, do your best to min-max in 1 year. See what you can do. My monster who won was a Naga who had like 500 life, 500 skill, 500 power, 200 defense. It had its optimal tech loadout, so I had Turn Assault, I had Stab and Pierce and Tail Assault. And I barely won. Because there was a dragon that had 600 skill and 600 power. There was a Gallia that had max speed. 760 speed with minimum form. That shit was impossible to hit in 1 year. And that's because there are plenty of ways to abuse your monster into getting better stat gains. I think I hit my Naga's Prime in 7 weeks. I think that's what it was. I got the Prime in 7 weeks. I fed it Najeels every week. And a Najeel reduces your lifespan by 6 months. So I hit Prime super quickly. And then, no, you weren't allowed to use drugs. You couldn't use any drugs. Anything that raised your stats, you weren't allowed to use. So I used Najeel, because Najeel and Cassitan and Taromian all lower your lifespan by 25 weeks, which is just over 6 months. So you use those to get into Prime immediately, and then what I did was I grinded tournaments. I grinded tournaments because the stat gains you get from tournaments are better than the stat gains you can get on the ranch. Especially after Prime ends. And so I had a monster with like 400 and 503 stats, beating the shit out of rank S. Just re-rolling every time until I beat rank S and got the stat gains I wanted over and over again. And that's how I optimized for that tournament. And, you know, he won. He did really well. But the thing is, I really like gimmick tournaments like that. And I think if you only run a tournament that has like a 2997 stat cap every time, you miss out on the experimentation. You miss out on the knowledge checks and things like that. Because anybody can raise a monster to 2997, you know? And if you watched a couple of them, you can make it happen. It is what it is. But not everybody can do what I just described. Not everybody has the wherewithal in the game to make that happen. And so you really see the gap in knowledge between a new player and a competitive player, which isn't always noticeable in something like a generic stat cap. So that's why I like the variety. I love talking about competitive play. I don't know if you can tell. I am enamored with this shit.